Hey guys, it's Sign here with HobbiesofaMan once again, and today we're going to be doing our August Ramble video, and I want to talk about why manga beats comic books. Now, this is a topic I've talked about before. It's a topic that everyone talks about all the time ad nauseum. It's kind of ridiculous. It's a topic that I don't even think is true, right? And I've changed my stance on that quite a bit. I think earlier on in the history of the channel, I did mention that I thought manga was better than comic books, and there is a certain level of enjoyment that I get out of manga that I just don't get out of comic books. But I don't necessarily think they're better than the other. And also, I want to make it clear that comic books and manga are the exact same thing. They are both a storytelling medium that functions on paper, that is released by chapter, that is a combination of letters and pictures, right? Like, manga is the Japanese version of comic books. Comic books are the American version of comic books. Bande dessinée is the French version, or French-Belgian. Manhwa and manhwa are the Chinese and Korean versions of comic books. Like, all of it is the same stuff. There is really no difference between the two of them beyond something that I think is quite key that I want to talk about here today. So the reason why I'm talking about this is because on Twitter, I refuse to call it X, the other day I saw, someone asking, do you think comic books are dying out? And, me thinking that I have a great opinion about stuff in the moment was like, no, if you put comic books easily accessible on shelves on Target and Walmart, you'll see that comic books are in fact not dying out. People are willing to pick them up. It's not that they're unlikable or things that are not interesting. It's that they're impossible to find, right? So that's, I think, the primary issue. It's accessibility, and then secondary, but also quite big, is approachability of the subject matter, right? So, not even the subject matter, because I think everyone understands and can, enjoy superhero comics, but there is a level of lack of approachability that happens in DC and Marvel, right? So I will talk about that, but I do want to have a little bit of a conversation here. So I also saw, after saying that post and commenting on it, I saw that Midnight Rapato, a mutual of mine on Twitter, responded, and I responded back to him. So here is what we said to each other. And then, in a weird synchronicity type thing, I saw that Comic Pals had been doing some videos recently. I clicked on one of them, I went down the rabbit hole, I watched like 4 videos of theirs in a row, and it hit on one that's called, Why Can't Comic Books Keep Up with Manga? And that's really what I really want to talk about today, because I watched their video. I thought it was a good video. I think they're very knowledgeable people, but it's clear that none of the 4 of them, Marco, Kale, Sean, and I forgot the other guy's name, Tyler, I think, are really like big in manga. Like, they know about manga to an extent, right? But they're not like deep in it like I am, right? Like, as you guys can see all over me. And so some of the stuff that they were saying wasn't really like accurate or true. And so I wanted to kind of make a response video to them. And I will tag them on this so they see it. Because I think that they brought up a lot of interesting points, and I think Sean was actually very good at defending comic books in this case, because he did point out that, anything that manga has, comic books have too, but they kind of forgot like a few very important details that I think is the reason why manga beats out comic books in terms of sales and stuff, right? So this is also kind of a response to their video, kind of and in addition to their conversation, if that makes sense. I'm not like going against them. It's not like a contrarian video. It's like they made these points, and here's some more, opinions based on someone that is much more into manga than he is into comic books, which is the opposite view that they have, right? So that's kind of the setup for this, right? So, manga beats comic books because they're insanely accessible. Sean brought up the point that a lot of people that he knows that read manga don't read it, physically, they read it online. And that's actually very true. I know a lot of people that basically only read manga online, and most of them read it illegally, right? They read scans. However, For the vast majority of the basic manga that just about everyone will know and want to read, they're accessible, via apps and stuff very easily, sometimes for free, sometimes for a very low cost, right? So there's things like the Shonen Jump app, the Viz app, which is the second version of the Shonen Jump app, but it has other stuff besides Shonen Jump. There's the Manga Plus app, there's K-Manga, which sucks, there's Komiki, there's what's it called, Azuki, there's like a bunch of them, right? And the vast majority of people that read manga will probably just read shonen manga, so you only have to have Shonen Jump. For $2 a month, which is half the price of a single issue of comic books, you can read just about every story that has been published in English from the Shonen Jump magazine every day. I think there's a limit to how many chapters you can read per day, but it's pretty unlikely that you'll reach it. It's 100 chapters per day. You only have to pay $2, and you don't actually even have to pay. As long as you're sort of caught up with the story, you can read the latest 3 chapters of a story for free. You don't have to actually own the app. You don't have to have a subscription. You can just access it, right? And if you use your login information on a website, you actually unlock more comic books that way. You unlock more manga titles that they don't allow on the apps because of like adult content in them, right? So $2, which is half the price of a single issue of comics, you have access to like 300 titles, more or less, right? And that includes One Piece and Dragon Ball and JoJo's Bizarre Adventure, and it includes Naruto and Bleach, and basically that's what everyone kind of knows when it comes to manga, right? So I think that is one avenue of why manga is successful. It's insanely easy, and people are accustomed to reading it online because they grew up doing it illegally, and then they realize that, if I only pay $2, I can get the service that's better than the illegal scans, and it's right there on my phone or on my tablet or whatever, right? That is not really the case with comic books. I think that the Marvel app is bad. It's also useless because you can't get caught up to stuff. You have to wait, I think, like 3 months before they give you the latest issues, right? Like if a new issue came out yesterday, because I'm recording this on Thursday, yesterday was Wednesday, right? That's when new comic books are released. That comic is not available on the Marvel app until like September, right? Like if today is July, it's not available until September, right? At least that's how I think it works. And I think it's the same thing with DC, right? I also don't necessarily find that those apps are very good. The GI, like the UI is kind of crappy. And I think that about most comic reading apps. It's not just like DC and Marvel. I think about that. I think that about most of the ones that I mentioned before, right? I think the only ones that are good are Viz and Shonen Jump, and that's because they're made by the same company. So they just made the Shonen Jump app really good, and then they copied it for the Viz app, right? So that's the only one I like using, to be honest with you. So yeah, so that's one avenue in which manga is more accessible than comic books. The second avenue is that you can literally go anywhere, and there is a way for you to find a manga, and it's pretty unlikely that you'll find a comic book at the same place, right? So you can buy manga at Walmart, at Target, you can buy it at Barnes & Noble's, and they have a giant section there. You can buy it on Amazon, and it's pretty cheap. You can buy it on InStock Trades, even though that's a comic book website. Where else? I've seen it at Kroger sometimes. They don't never show up at HEB, but it's just a matter of time. Honestly, I bet that in a few months, they'll even sell manga at Buc-ee's. And they even sell manga on, at discount stores like Five Below. Five Below has specific manga that are made specifically to be sold there from Kodansha, which is one of the manga publishers that are really big. And you can buy certain titles for really cheap from Five Below. You can't do that with comic books. Comic books are basically exclusively sold in comic book shops, and most places don't have a comic book shop near, them, right? So the reason I got into comic books after I had gotten into manga is because I realized that I moved to a place, this apartment complex that I live here in right now. I realized that this place is like up the road from a comic book store. If I had stayed in my parents' house down in Houston, I live in Dallas now. If I'd stayed down in Houston, and I don't actually live in Houston, I live like in a suburban city next to Houston, right? So it doesn't really matter. But like, if I had stayed over there, the nearest comic book store to me is 40 minutes away. I would never go there. One, because I didn't know it existed until recently. And two, because there is no point. My parents were very willing to buy me whatever book I wanted whenever I wanted growing up, right? Like, I never had to struggle with that, right? It wasn't something that was difficult for me to find a way to do, right? They would buy me manga and comic books and whatever I wanted as long as I was reading. They didn't really care. I mostly just bought novels though, but that's not the point. Even if they would have been willing to take me to buy me any comics that I wanted, they would have not been willing to take me to a store that only sells comic books, that's really far away, that has nothing to do with anything else that we might be interested in getting, right? So the fact that for whatever reason, people decided that the model for selling comic book stores is a niche, for selling comic books is a niche store, like, you're shooting yourself in the foot. No one wants to go to a specific store just to get a comic book when you can get manga literally everywhere. Like, that is, I think, the biggest problem with accessibility. I can't find comic books easily. It's hard. It's difficult. I have to go out of my way to go to a specific store. Specific stores that are niche, that are for specific things, only work for bespoke stuff, for really high quality things, or for things that are really rare and special, right? Like an antique shop, or a fountain pen store for a specific company. Like if you wanted a Lamy fountain pen, not in the US, but anywhere else, you might want to go to the Lamy store, right? Like in Mexico, they have Lamy stores in specific places, right? Or here, I guess there is a Mont Blanc store, which is a fancy fountain pen brand near here in Dallas. But like, that's like a special item. Like it's a one and done type of thing. You buy it once, you spend $1,000 on this Mont Blanc pen, and then you use that for the rest of your life, and maybe your kids even use it too, right? For the whole time that they're alive as well. Like, it makes sense to have a bespoke, like special niche store for items like this, because they're items that you're not gonna sell very often. They're items that are special, that mean a lot, and so you can kind of sustain this kind of thing, right? No one wants to do that for basic entertainment, right? I mean, people don't even go to the movie theaters anymore to watch movies because they can just watch it at their house. And so movies now have that same accessibility problem where it's like, why would I go over there and have to drive and spend money just to access a movie when I can just stay at home? And it's the same thing with comic books, right? So I think that's actually the biggest problem, I think. And then that leads me to approachability. Manga is, in vogue right now. It's very popular to like manga. It's really easy to like manga. And comic books are the same thing. There is no reason why they shouldn't, feed off of each other, but they don't. And the reason for that is because it's insanely easy to approach a manga. There are a ton of television shows that are just the manga, but adapted to a show. Like, they don't change anything. The storyline, the dialogue, everything is the same. The only difference is the medium, right? If that's like, when that happens, a kid, whether he's 5 or 20, or whether he's a grown man in his 40s or whatever, can watch this show, can watch the first season of Demon Slayer, know where it ends, and then immediately walk down to the store, whether it's Walmart or Barnes & Noble, and pick up the next issue or the next story or the next volume or whatever you want to call it, the next part of that story that they just watched on TV. That is insanely approachable, right? And if you're kind of nervous and you don't know anything and this is your first time, you can just walk down the hall, find one that says number 1, make sure that it's the title that you want, find the title of the thing. If you're interested in it, grab it. If not, move on to the next one and just do that. And then come back next time and you know exactly which one you're supposed to get, because it's the one that looks exactly the same, but now it has a number 2 on it instead of a number 1, right? And you do that over and over again until you have the whole series, right? And then as you kind of get into it, you learn more about that. That is not really the case with comic books, right? First of all, legacy numbering is kind of out the door at this point. but it's a big problem. I am afraid of something that has more than 500 chapters, right? However, if I go to a store, to a comic book store, if I somehow was a new person to comic books and I decided to go to the comic book store and I got the next number one, chances are that this number one, whether I'm talking about a single issue or a trade, might require me to know a lot about the canon of the story, or it might require me to know who Spider-Man is, or it might require me to know who this random character that I don't know but I picked because it looks really cool is, even though I have no clue who they are, right? Or it requires me to know why Batman has like 12 members in his family, right? Or why Batman is like this guy that I thought was only a crime fighter, but somehow he's fighting in space against some alien, right? Like, there's a lot of barriers to entry with a comic book, beyond the fact that it's hard to figure out where to start, right? Because I hear people talk about this all the time, right? It's not that hard. Just pick a character and grab a number one and then move on. Okay, sure, I can do that. And if I started a new series that is like currently ongoing, that's easy. If I started like, I don't know, whatever run The Killing Joke is on, and I start with number one of that, and then I come back to buy another volume, and I grab another volume too, or like another trade and it's volume two, it might not be for that story that I started, right? And I would have to discern that. That doesn't happen with manga. I can easily tell, okay, this Dragon Ball is different from this Dragon Ball Super, right? Like, they're different titles, even though they have the same characters. It's really hard to mess up because the art styles are different, the storytelling is different, the translation is different. Like, there's a bunch of differences between all of those. That's not necessarily the case with comic books, right? And there's a certain kind of like dauntingness to the fact that even though these things are supposed to be very continuous and have this continuity and continue from the base starting point of when the series first started, right, for comic books, that's not really true. They end and restart all the time. And that leads to this creation of different versions of the same character, which I think is another issue, right? That this isn't really accessibility or approachability. It's like the fact that community building is kind of hard for comic books. Now, don't get me wrong, manga communities and fans are toxic and disgusting and have so many problems all over the place. And comic book fans do too. But there is a certain like comfort in knowing that if I read Naruto and you watch the Naruto anime, we are still talking about the same guy, because Naruto doesn't change between those two versions, right? If you and I talk to a guy that reads Boruto and didn't read Naruto, we know that he's talking about a different version of Naruto that is still the same Naruto that we know, just in a different situation, right? If I am a fan of Batman and I go talk to someone else that also says they like Batman, we might not be talking about the same Batman. Maybe I'm talking about Scott Snyder's Batman. Maybe he's talking about, Frank Miller's Batman, right? Or maybe he's talking about the movie Batman from, the Christian Bale version, right? Or maybe he's talking about the Robert Pattinson one. And I mean, we would know eventually that we're talking about different Batman, and technically they are the same, but they're not exactly the same, because there's a certain level of maturity and tone and difference between those characters because of who's writing them that just doesn't exist in manga, right? I mean, interpretations are still different, right? So the way I see Naruto might be slightly different from the way, you see Naruto. But broadly speaking, we'll know that we're talking about the same guy because he is the same guy. Because there's like only one version of him, right? That's not really the case with comic books. So I think that's another issue. And I think ultimately the really important bit here is that manga is cheaper, dude. Like, way cheaper. Those books there that are hardcovers, those are kind of expensive, right? But those ones up there, the most expensive one is $13. That is cheaper than a trade, like even the paperbacks, and it has more content in it, and it's generally more fun. There's more things going on, and there's a certain comfort in knowing that this is just a slice of the story, and that the story is going to finish at some point, right? That's not really the case with Batman and Superman and Spider-Man and all of these different characters, right? Like, technically, they end because a run stops and then a new one starts, but they don't end it because, they are still there. they still continue, and there is no finality to them, right? There is a finality to Spy Family eventually. There is a finality to Luffy and in One Piece. It will eventually end, right? Not yet, because Oda is crazy, but that's not really important. That is not the case with Batman and Robin and Superman and Wonder Woman and stuff. So it's hard to care almost. Not really, but like I don't know how to word it otherwise. It's hard to relate, maybe is the right word, to that, because I know that they're just going to keep going after I stop reading them. And so it almost feels like there's no reason for me to continue or to stop. And so once I get into it, I'm kind of just in this weird limbo space. And then sometimes I don't even enjoy the stories, right? So it's like odd, right? And I think a lot of people feel that way, specifically about Spider-Man, right? Like if you hear Sal from Comic Pop talk about stuff, he's like, I love Spider-Man. He's my favorite character. And I know a bunch of people that just buy the comic book and don't really, read it. And then, he talks about how he reads it and he hates one of them and he loves the other one. And it's like, well, aren't they the same guy? Why do you like one and not the other, right? Like, that's exactly what I'm talking about. That you don't have that issue with manga, right? There was something else I wanted to talk about, but I think at this point I forgot what it was. Okay, when I talk about money, I talk about how easy it is to find a manga and read it. I talked about... Oh, okay, I know what it was. Sean, in the Comic Pals video, also mentioned this issue that people have where comic books are too woke. And he said it like this, and I will agree with him. I do think that a lot of people think comic books are woke. Even I think that sometimes. And I don't necessarily think comic books are more woke than Japanese comics. I think Japanese comics are still very prevalently full of political leanings and ideas. And of course they have to, because they're created by people and people are inherently political, because politics is just the word we use for group dynamic, right? And, if you're an individual that has a thought and you exist in a community, you have some political aspect to you, right? But I think that that's for a few reasons, right? And it's mostly because, we are in the same sphere as comic book creators, where we're not in the same sphere as mangaka, right? Manga creators are called mangaka, for those of you that don't know. I go on Twitter and I can easily see, what Kelly Thompson or, Scott Snyder or Tom Taylor or Tom King or any of these creators think about politics and stuff, because they put it on their Twitter and they do stuff. And, I'm not really a comic skater either, but there is a certain level of truth, I guess, to some of the stuff they say, where it's kind of ridiculous that writers in comic books, attack their fans or attack fans of the comic book characters when they don't like the messages that the creators are trying to espouse to them. I think that fans are kind of whack in this situation, but it's also kind of whack that, a creator whose livelihood depends on these people buying their book would also go out of their way to be like, don't like my book, don't read it. It's like, well, dude, if we did that, you wouldn't have a job, right? Like, it's kind of odd to say that, right? So it's easy to see that and to get upset about it and then decide that comic books are bad because whatever, right? Whatever political idea that you like or don't like is represented or not represented in the comic book. That doesn't really happen with manga because there's a language barrier, there's a translation issue, and also there is a certain degree of separation. The issues of politics that exist in Japan are not exactly the same as the ones that exist here in the States, right? And so even though these Japanese manga might be full of political commentary and political issues and stuff like that, there's a lot more subtlety to them, I think, in general. Like in One Piece, right? The author and the story of One Piece is anti-government. But because of the phrasing of the story and because of who we follow as a character and all of that stuff, you can argue that it's not that serious. You don't have to look at it that way. Even though it's all underlying there, it's not exactly necessary for you to understand that. I don't think that that's true for modern day like Marvel comics. I think a lot of them want you to talk about the political aspect, right? Or like Tom Taylor's run on Superman, like he wanted you to talk about the political aspect of it, right? That's not necessarily true for manga, right? And even though they're full of commentary and you know, manga have political ideas, because we as Westerners are not aware of the political you know, decisions and difficulties that are being faced in Japan, we can look at a manga and just be like, oh, that's an interesting story that has some political message, but it's not relevant to me, so who cares? It's just a fantasy issue, right? That is harder to do when you read American comic books, right? So there is that, right? I don't think American comic books are necessarily more woke than manga. I think they're probably less so, actually. I think that there's a lot of discourse that happens through manga because I feel like it's much more prevalent in the society to read manga in Japan, even though, you know, they hate people that read manga, right? Like they hate otakus or whatever, than it is to read comic books here in the States. And so I feel like it makes more sense for Japanese stuff to be more political. It's just that we as dumb Americans can't really understand that it's political because it doesn't, you know, it doesn't necessarily fit within our political, you know, frame, right? If that makes sense. So I don't think that's an issue. Although I understand why a lot of people think so. Like I understand why a lot of people think they'd rather read manga than comic books because manga is not woke. Even though it is, it's because they're like not understanding that it is, and you know that's just, you know, it is what it is, right? So there, I talked about the politics of these stories. I talked about accessibility. I talked about approachability. Is there anything else that I can think of that might lead to comic books being, you know, less accessible or less likely to be bought than manga? I don't think so. I think I covered basically everything, and it was very kind of random. Sorry, there's not going to be any editing on this video beyond some minor things because that's kind of what the rambles are. So hopefully it's not too hard to follow what I'm saying. But yeah, those are my thoughts. If the Comic Pals people watch this video, thank you guys very much for watching it. I hope you guys leave a comment. And anyone else, also thank you very much for watching. I really do appreciate it. And I hope you guys leave a comment. Let me know what you think about what I said. Am I right? Am I wrong? You know, is there a problem with how I look at this stuff? Is there truth to what I'm saying? Is there, you know, more nuance than what I'm really looking at, right? Let me know down in the comments. Thank you guys so much for doing so, and see you guys in the next video. So, goodbye.